A mother is out driving her young child, her young son, to an appointment. And she turns to him and she says, "I can't wait until you're 16 and you can get your very own driver's license. You can have your very own driver's license." The son replies, "If, mother, if I decide to get a driver's license." And she looks at him and says, "What do you mean, if?" And the son talks back to her and says to her, "Well, Mom, there's lessons involved. There's, permits, there's practice, there's tests. Got to get a car, the cost of insurance. All of that has to be taken into consideration. We're talking about a big commitment here." And the mom says, "I'm not talking about a big commitment. I'm talking about my freedom." And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is our freedom. So welcome those of you who are tuning in to our Unity at Monroe YouTube channel on this week. I'm going to call it the Independence Week. It's our Independence Week. So we celebrate it today. And for those of you who are here assembled, I am delighted that you are a part of this celebration, this service today, talking about our founding freedoms, what they represent, what they signify. As I said, this Saturday marks our 250th anniversary, birthday, the birth of this country, the birth of that process, that freedom, that idea, if you will. And it talks about the history, and we look at this about our history of 250 years and what we've gone through, what we're still going through. Even going back some 250 years, this birth of a country, this birth of a nation, if you will, going back 250 years, we had a document that was signed entitled the Unanimous Declaration of the United States of America. But it was hardly unanimous when you know the history a little bit of that particular signing of that document, of them trying to iron out this unanimous vote. Finally, it did come to a unanimous decision. But in our country, we know now, it wasn't all that unanimous, which I think tells us something about where we are right now, some 250 years later. It wasn't unanimous in our country. The theory is, or the belief is, that about 40% of our country, about 40%, were for this revolution, this breaking away, this unanimous declaration that we are an independent country. Only about 40%. About 20 to 25% were still wanting us to be aligned with Great Britain. They still wanted us to be loyal to the king and the crown. The other few percentages, if you will, were those that were either apathetic, pacifists, or wanted to just keep things the way they were. They didn't want to rock the boat. They were undecided. Now think about that in relationship to all we've come through in the past 250 years, where we are right now. And we think, oh, we're so divided, we're so this. Just look back at 1776. Just look back at the Civil War. Just look back at times of turmoil, economic challenges, the Depression. So today's lesson really about founding freedoms is not only centered on what those freedoms mean to us as a country, but what they mean to us as an individual person and for all creation. And it's about looking a little bit about our history, the history of our country, and how we process that, but the history of our own sense of freedom. The freedom that God has given us, this wonderful gift or inheritance of freedom and what it represents. So maybe today's lesson is a little more of an insight, if you will, into how that history is born in us. Because I think the more we know, the more you know about history, and I'm not just talking about our country or world, the more you know about it, the more you can relate to your brothers and sisters. And I'm not just talking about your, actual brothers and sisters. I'm talking about everyone. Because we have a lot of differences of opinions and thoughts and ideas. That's part of the celebration of our freedom. But not to the point where I say, oh, because you, Mary Ann, believe a different thing than I do, I can't have anything to do with you. What it's saying to me is that when I understand history, especially my own history, the history of a human being, you, me, and all of us, the more I can understand the heart and the soul of somebody else. So it's both history from the perspective of our country, but it's history from within ourselves. One of the things about this life journey that we're on, I think, is that it plays out when we know our own history so that we can then make another choice, perhaps. Take a different path, if you will. Last Sunday, of course, was Father's Day. And one of the great gifts I got for Father's Day was a book. I put this on my list because this is something I wanted. But it's a book by David McCullough. Some of you may be familiar with who David McCullough was. God bless his soul. David McCullough was an author of many great books, including books like The Pioneers. And I certainly recommend, some of you have read that, The Pioneers, because it's about the opening of the Northwest Territory and really the beginnings of the state of Ohio. But McCullough wrote so many great books, including a great book, 1776. Wow, that's appropriate for right now. 1776, another great work by him. John Adams, Truman. The book on the Brooklyn Bridge, The Great Bridge. Another great book by David McCullough. Many great books by him. The Wright brothers as well. And you may remember David McCullough as well. He had just a unique narrative voice. He was the longtime narrator for many seasons of the American Experience, and he narrated as well the Civil War, the series on PBS by Ken Burns. So he was active and involved and was such a creative writer. But McCullough, in this book, after he's passed away, his daughter and editor came up with a series of letters and lectures and different commencement speeches that he gave over the years. And they put it together in this book called History Matters. And I think history does matter. You know me, I'm a fanatic for history. I love history, whether it's the history of the Bible or the history of churches or the history of our country or our world. I love history. In this book, History Matters, McCullough talks about how history functions and works. He says, history shows us how to behave. History teaches, reinforces what we believe in, what we stand for and what we ought to be willing to stand for. History is, or should be, and I love this, the bedrock of patriotism. Not the chest-pounding kind of patriotism, but the real thing. Love of country. Not the chest-pounding, I'm going to proselytize out in the city square, but just the recognition that, yeah, I'm here to honor and support this whole nation. This nation of possibilities. This nation of country, and the love that we have for that, and in that. So, as a country, for 250 years, to this day, we have struggled, have we not, with issues as we've kind of developed through the Declaration, through the Constitution, through all the things that we've gone through. We've struggled with issues. We've struggled with challenges, personal as well, to understand what it means to be a person of freedom, to extend that to everyone in our country. We know that the Declaration of Independence first outlined that, but it wasn't for all people. It wasn't for women. It wasn't for people of color. The only people that mattered back in that day and age, 250 years ago, were if you were a white landowner and happened to be a member of a certain Protestant faith and tradition. That's it. You had to be a male. You had to be a male, too. That was all that mattered back then. But now we uphold a greater truth and understanding of wisdom, that all people are created equal. What does that mean? How does that quicken our soul, our life, our experience? All are created equal. You know, you may have heard people over the years, even today, talking about, well, we got to get back to traditions. We got to get back to the Bible. We got to get back to God's laws being taught here and there. But I always say, what does that mean? I don't understand. What do you mean by God's laws? Are we going back to the Old Testament? So I was thinking about that, and I was looking stuff up in Leviticus, because that's just a great book to read on its own. Oy, Gewalt. That's some tough reading. That and the book of Numbers are two of the more challenging books, let me tell you. So I read through some of the things in Leviticus. I was going to outline all of them, and I thought, oh, this will just take forever. These Mosaic laws that were traditions 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. Maybe it made sense to them back then, Carl. I don't know. But the one that I always thought was interesting, because I think it affects all of us, because at one point in time we may have thought this or verbalized this, but it says in Leviticus 29, any person who curses his mother or father must be killed. That's pretty violent. Maybe you shook your fist at your mom or dad or said, darn it. Or you kind of looked at them cross-eyed. My kids used to say when we would, impose something on them or, take something away from them because they didn't do their homework, they'd say, I hate you. They cursed us. Maybe I should have thrown a rock at him, Marianne. I don't know. But you think about that as the archaic laws, like you have to not cut your hair, not keep your beard growing. You can't plant, one crop beside the next crop. You can't wear two different kind of cloths, clothing, apparel, and on and on and on. If a husband is unfaithful to his wife, guess what? They both get killed. Does that make sense? No. If you want some insight into ancient cultures that may have worked back then, but it certainly doesn't and shouldn't have worked back then, but certainly doesn't work now, read the book of Leviticus. Especially if you need to go to sleep. No, did I say that? So surely this is not what we would call religious or spiritual freedom. This idea of imposing the beliefs of what other people say is God's law. Because that's not freedom to me. Freedom doesn't mean I have the freedom to say, oh, I'm going to harm Carl or someone else. Freedom just simply is a freedom of thought and heart and conviction. So freedom is not like hurting someone to get our way. It is recognizing the freedom that we have of that spiritual inheritance of peace and the possibilities of life itself. So there are ancient laws, archaic laws, but maybe there's something greater there, as Jesus talked about this idea in the book of John, where he talked about this idea of, and I've shared this before with you, what is that to thee, follow thou me? Now, this is one of my favorite passages from the book of John. And I put it into the King James way of saying it because that's how I first learned it, and it kind of rhymes. What is that to thee, follow thou me? It's this idea of recognizing this invitation of where Jesus says, what is that to you, follow me? So this whole idea of freedom, when we're recognizing the value that we have of a free mind and a soulful heart, recognizes that freedom is not dependent on someone else. And freedom has to be free within us when we are not judging others, when we're not looking at someone and saying, I'm going to accuse you because you're doing something that's a little different than I would normally do. And again, I think about all those wonderful cultures that have come to our shores in North America for the World Cup and the traditions that they have. It's so wonderful to kind of look at that. Maybe you're watching some of it on news or on YouTube or something like that. My favorite one, of course, was all of the Scots people that came over to the United States. First were in Boston, and I think they were drinking the town dry. They were running out of beer in Boston, so God bless them. But when we run across this idea of what freedom means to us, how can I be free? when I'm holding on to something against my brother or sister? How can I be free when I hold something in my heart that says you are not a child of the universe, a child of God, a child of spirit, because you do something different? Now, I've shared this before, that I grew up in a family, on both sides of my family, that were, shall we say, stuck in their prejudices, mired in the muck of saying that, well, because you are a color, or you are from another nation, you are this or that, or you believe this way, you are not good. You're not a good person. This disrespect. And I grew up in this family, not that they were out on the streets necessarily, but this was kind of the feeling, the discussion around the dining room table at times. Oh, did you see what this person did? And I'm a kid growing up. And it took everything that there was within me to say, this is not what I truly believe. This is not what's in my heart. It may have been a seed that was sown, but it was a choice that I could make, and we all make. This idea of, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. So what is Jesus inviting us to do? And again, I said, this is one of my favorite passages, because this is one of the first verses I learned in the Bible. Back when I was 7 or 8 years old, I think. What is that to thee? Follow thou me. Jesus isn't inviting us into a church. Jesus wasn't a Christian. Jesus was a pious Jew. What's he inviting us to do? Inviting us into learning from the ways of his teachings, away from the archaic 3,000, 4,000, 5,000-year-old laws of the Mosaic tradition. The laws that he's teaching, the truth in the teachings he's giving us, are about love and compassion and about embracing others who are different, like the lepers or even those who were in authority. Yes, he stood up against those people of authority, but he always still extended a willingness, like when Peter was willing to take up the sword at the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus says, put away that sheath, that sword. And what Jesus is saying when we look at this metaphysically, to follow thou me, is to follow that inner spirit of the Christ in you. Jesus never pointed the finger and said, oh, it's all about me. He's embracing all of us and saying, follow the wisdom of God within you. What is the wisdom of God saying to you right now about your freedom, your own personal freedom? What is that to thee? All of that out here is a distraction. It keeps us away from our true freedom, the freedom to be as God intended us to be. That's our true estate, my friends, our true estate. Now, I'm not talking about from time to time we don't get a little angry, a little upset with a partner, a friend, something in our past. I'm talking about when we really hold on to it, like my family did for so long. Held on to this idea that, oh, because you're different, you belong to a different church, or you live in a different neighborhood. That to me is not what freedom is all about. Never could be. Freedom is truly an expression of heart and soul, of consciousness, where we allow ourselves to live as God intended us to live. I had a good friend, who felt this burden of unforgiveness. There were so many things in his life. In particular, he had a partner who had basically taken money from his business. And for 20, 25, 30 years, he was still holding on to that pain. He lost money, yes. He lost a friend. All of that. And yet, the longer he held on to that, the more his condition, his health situation, was worsening. His back was worsening because he was holding on. There was that burden, that sense of weight upon him, until he was willing to simply work toward letting that possibility go. and say, I'm not going to be involved. I'm not going to be held up. I'm not going to be shackled by these chains that bind me. So when we get to this idea of what freedom truly means, we have the celebration of our 250 years. And we know how that has processed through those 250 years. But we also know there's a founding freedom within us that says you are not burdened by whatever you've come through. Why? Because you are a child of the universe. You're a child of God. You and I and every single soul on this planet from day one is an original blessing of God. Original blessings are gifted with what? Freedom. They're gifted with a choice to choose this day the path of love. If I'm burdened by something in my past or some person, what is that to thee? Follow the wisdom of your Christ Spirit, of God within you. So I chose today to speak on this idea of what it means to live in this country, the history of our country, to let it be an inspiration, not just for our country, but for our own personal life, because there may be times when we go through those turmoils. There may be times when we go through that sense of confusion. There may be times when we don't quite process and understand it all, and yet we stand for something, as we should all stand for as Americans. That freedom within and without, that freedom for all creation, that freedom for all of our citizens. So with our power, we can seek to work for equality, so that we can seek to work as Jesus did, to be tolerant of others who were different, to be tolerant of all. So with a sound mind and heart, may this week inspire us. May we become the change we wish to see, because it's all about finding the freedom within. None of this out here can affect us or infect us, I should say, unless we're willing to let it fester within ourselves. When we stand for freedom, none of that matters. All that matters is recognizing the Spirit of God in us. So let's take time this week to not only learn the history of our country and let that inspire us and celebrate it, but to know that it moves us into that quality of recognizing our own history, to make that effort to be that better person, being that we called to be, all of us are called to be. One nation under God, indivisible. One nation with liberty and, shall we say, justice for all. Justice, recognizing that, yes, in this moment, I celebrate the founding freedoms of my country. I celebrate the founding freedoms of God. And so I celebrate God's peace, prosperity, love, and understanding. Now let's move into these moments of quiet and contemplation as we contemplate what it means to be free and unlimited. And I invite you to simply close your eyes and let us begin this process together of founding freedoms within and without. And as we sit back and relax right now, finding comfort in that place and space, finding comfort by breathing in this moment, breathing in, and then letting go and breathing out. Just take a moment to bless this vessel that you are, this being that you are, this entity, to bless your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, to bless your whole physical nature from head to toe, to bless your mind that is quickened and lifted up and inspired, to bless every part of your physical body from head to toe. And to know that in this moment, the quality, the principles of Spirit, of God's gift to each one of us is alive, is the freedom that we attain in thought, words, and action. I pause in this moment, loving presence, to welcome in and honor this quality, this dimension of what it means to be a free and unlimited being. As these days progress, one after the next, may I be lifted up in recognizing the quality of freedom, the foundational freedom that comes to and through all of us. I am free to choose this day the quality, the presence of God. I am free to let go of concerns and doubts and to remember that there's a greater calling that says, lift up your soul. Greet the Christ in others as I honor the Christ within. I recognize this very day and this very week ahead as I pray about and meditate on, as I process these founding freedoms. Freedoms to think, to believe, to choose. These are freedoms I see and feel and affirm for my fellow countrymen. For these are freedoms that I affirm and claim within myself. In the vastness of this great nation, a nation of possibilities and insight and soulful application, I am grateful. And I am willing to not just discover, but release that freedom to live with vitality, live with possibilities. Founding freedoms are not just within myself, but they are in the soul, the heart, and the consciousness of every being. I am free at last because I choose in this moment to live in that expectancy of great freedom. So invite yourself in this day, this week, to think on, to meditate, to find that sense of insight and awareness of how freedom rings true. How freedom is an idea that is quickened in the soul of our country, is quickened in our own individual soul, and will continue through whatever journey we are on. Well, that is the founding and foundational freedoms. Take a moment to think on, to affirm, to declare, and to know the power and the value of freedom. Freedom to be, freedom to live, freedom to choose this day, freedom within and without. In the silence. I hold this truth to be self-evident, that all are created equal, for all are original ideas and blessings of God. As I celebrate that with my fellow country people, as I celebrate it with family and friends, I honor the power of freedom that quickens my soul, that inspires and affirms who I am as it expands my consciousness. Thank you, loving presence, for the power and the presence of freedom within and without. I celebrate this day as I celebrate this country. So be it. So be it. Amen.